And now I want to introduce our speaker for today, Jamie Notter at WorkXO, and he's going to present to us on What Got You Here Won't Get You There, the Culture Edition. So we are very honored to have Jamie with us today. So I will pass it over to him. Thank you, Jamie.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity and to hang out with you guys for half an hour before you run off and get lunch. I feel a little nervous being the guy in between you and food, but we'll deal with that since it's virtual anyway. As Kevin said, I'm going to talk about the concept of what got you here won't get you there, but in the context of organizational culture. Many of you may be aware of this book title. It was Marshall Goldsmith, and the book is written more about you as a leader. The practices that sort of got you to where you are in your career may not be the ones that get you to the next level. And it's more of an individual development book. But I am seeing a lot of associations facing this challenge more broadly, either at a business model level or at an organizational culture level, that the organizational culture that you had that got you to where you are, that built your success over the last 10, 20 to 100 plus years is not necessarily the culture that's going to get you to the next level in today's environment. And I think more and more organizations are facing this challenge, but I think they are not quite equipped on how to really shift culture and know what to do to adapt it. And I do think people are realizing that the culture piece is important, although I like to emphasize a little bit about why, because a lot of people sort of say, oh, well, culture is important, but I'd rather them sort of actually hash it out, like tell me why culture is important. And I think one of the critical reasons is that culture drives behavior inside your organization. We don't confront this enough. We tend to think of culture as how it makes us feel, or this vague what it's like to work there answer, but the bottom line is the culture that you have is what drives the behavior internally. And if you don't align your culture with the kind of behaviors that are going to drive your success, then I think you're going to be missing out. And the second piece that I think does not get enough attention, I'm realizing this lately with some of the work I'm doing, culture not only drives behavior, but culture is really important during times of change. If you are trying to change something, if the earth is shifting beneath your feet, like you're trying to deal with a new business model, you're trying to do digital transformation, then maybe there's some big disruption in your industry, maybe you got a new CEO, I don't know, maybe you're undergoing like huge growth, all of that puts you in a place where your culture is going to need to shift. And if you don't shift the culture, but you're really clear on the change you need, you're going to aim for that change, and you're not going to quite get there, because the culture will drag it down, will slow it down, or move it off target somehow. So I think today is more important than ever to really zero in on clarifying what your culture is so that it doesn't get in the way of the change that you know you need to deal with these days, which, again, the change you're dealing with is going to vary, but either way, you need to understand the culture. So in that light, I want to give you a really clear definition of culture. People always tell me, oh, it's too hard to define, it's complex, it's squishy. I don't buy that. My definition, for the record, is that culture is the collection of words, actions, thoughts, and, forgive the technical term, stuff, that clarify and reinforce what is truly valued inside your organization. And I choose the word valued with a D, not values with an S, because I got to be honest, I know many of you out there have your core value statements, and you're probably proud of them, and that's really fine, I guess. But core values really tell the story, right? Like, culture is the words, actions, thoughts, and stuff. You should choose those words carefully. And I get that your values of excellence and collaboration and member focus and whatever else you've chosen, like, those are important at a high level, but I don't think they tell a complete story of what's valued inside your organization. So be disciplined about that. Get more specific in your language. Tell a more complete story. And then when you get the story right, make sure that the actions match it, right? Like, we all know this. We say our culture is one thing, and then the leaders behave in a particularly different way. Well, the behaviors win that game. right? You can say you're all about empowering your employees till you're blue in the face, but when you show up in front of your direct report and say, hey, how's that project going? And they're like, oh, well, we already delivered it. And you're like, ooh, did I get to see that? The minute you engage in that behavior, all those words about how your culture is about empowerment are gone because they get it. It's not about empowerment. It's about making sure you've approved it before it goes out. So watch the actions, make sure they match up with the words, and then really pay attention to your office space and your decor and your dress code and things like that, because that also that's the stuff part that also reinforces what's valued. Like, you got to be really disciplined about this and get down to that level if you're going to make sure that culture supports the change that you're trying to achieve. Again, to me, that's the goal here, and the sort of purpose of today's whole conversation is to really zero in on that. So in order to be more disciplined about describing your culture and understanding your culture and being clear about people about which parts of your culture are going to matter the most right now given the change you're going through, then we have come up with, at WorkXO, we've come up with these 8 what we call culture markers: agility, collaboration, growth, inclusion, innovation, solutions, technologies, and transparency. And I recognize that you all now have just instantly won buzzword bingo. Like, I get it, like collaboration and transparency and innovation. Like, there's a lot of buzzwords up there. And I'll explain in a minute sort of the underneath them, what lies underneath them, so that you can get a little more specific. But we didn't choose these because they're the cool words. We actually chose these based on research that Maddie Grant and I did in our 2 books. Okay, so this goes back years. We have been researching the future of work. We've been researching a big transition that's happening in leadership and management. It's been going on for several decades now, really, away from the traditional management of the 20th century and towards what we're calling future of work, right? Traditional management, when you think about all those terms, agility, collaboration, innovation, those are all we're not very agile, and we don't collaborate enough, and we're not very transparent, and we really don't care about innovation. That was traditional management. Future of work is really on the other end of that scale. And when we looked at, when we did the research for the book Humanize, we came up with what in those days, what social media was telling us about this revolution in management. And there's a more human approach to organizations as opposed to a mechanical one. And we were picking up on these signals, right? The authenticity and collaboration and truth and experimentation. Like, this stuff was mattering more in the organizations that were embracing the ideas behind social media. And then when we sort of went the next level and started doing case study research for the book When Millennials Take Over, we found organizations that embraced these 4 capacities: digital, clear, fluid, and fast, which really, as you can probably tell, overlap with the research we did in Humanize. But we found organizations that were doing these things, right? They were not just talking about being digital or clear or fluid and fast. They were embracing the ideas fully and practicing them. And for the record, we had 4 case studies, one for each of these capacities. And one of them was in Chicago, was in Association Chicago, just so be proud. The American Society for Surgery of the Hand was our case study for digital. And they really embraced a digital mindset. It wasn't just about technology. They were designing around the needs of the user. They were customizing their organizational practices. It's pretty cool stuff, very future of work. And so when you go back to the 8 culture markers, you're not just saying, hey, are we good at transparency? Are we good at agility? Like, that's not the point. The point is, where do you stand on the continuum from traditional to futurist on all of these markers? If you don't know that, you won't be able to describe accurately your culture to your people right now. And then when you try and make a change, it won't make sense to them. This is really, really huge. I used to be a big fan of transparency of all these markers, thinking this is the future, we all need to go in this direction. And I have learned we don't all need to go in this direction, not on every one of them. I tell people all the time, if you're a nuclear power plant, I don't want you to be that agile or maybe that innovative. I don't want you hacking things. I want you being consistent and checking it twice or 3 times. Like, depending on what you're trying to achieve, you can be anywhere on this continuum, but you will be on a continuum somewhere between traditionalist and futurist on all of these markers. And knowing that is the first step to creating a culture that's going to work with change. I can't emphasize this enough, that if you don't describe accurately to your people, if you can't reflect accurately to your people what your culture is when you're in the middle of a change, the direction you're heading in is not going to make sense to them. And people tell me all the time, oh, everyone resists change. You know, it's just natural. We just get to deal with resistance to change. And I just don't buy it. People don't resist change. They resist doing things they think are stupid. Okay? They resist doing things that they think are against their best interests. And they very much resist things that don't make sense. And so that's why I'm a big fan. That's why I emphasize so much this getting clear on what your culture is in order to support the change you're going through. So part of it is about being clear, hey, well, this is where we stand on this range between traditional and futurist, including contemporary. But you're going to have to get pretty detailed in describing that. It's not just saying we are futurist or we are not. And so I'm going to give you 2 examples, and these come from associations that we've worked with, that show you what this looks like and how you use it. Okay? So here is, these are actual data points from an assessment we did with an association, and these are all the building blocks within the marker of innovation. And for this particular association, innovation was important to them. They felt they'd been getting feedback basically from their members that they were being a little slow and they were not quite keeping people ahead of the curve. And so innovation was important. And when they looked at their scores, they realized it's actually pretty futurist. I mean, experimentation 7.3 is 7.5 is the cutoff for sort of contemporary to futurist. Above 7.5 is futurist. And they're almost there with experimentation. Creativity, 6.9, pretty high. Permission to hack, you know, that's like if I'm going to try something new, will I get backed up by my manager on that? So those are fairly contemporary, so that's maybe encouraging since they want more innovation. But look at the lower scores within this marker, like risk-taking at 5.0. Even testing new ideas is barely contemporary at 5.1. Continuous improvement, sort of, we can fix things if we need to, 3.8. So I remember having a conversation with them. I'm like, folks, how can you be good at experimenting and hacking? How can that be kind of a futurist thing where that's part of our system, part of our culture? But you can't test new ideas as much, and risk-taking is not encouraged. You can see that the description. We have a strong risk management controls in place to ensure that we're not threatened. You know, like, wait a minute, how do you hack, but you're so worried about being threatened? And in the conversation around that, it became clear that in their case, they actually had a new CEO. He'd been there about a little over a year, I think, when we did this. The previous CEO actually had been there a long time and really didn't like change. And so they realized that inside their culture, what had developed is the creativity and the hacking is because they were doing everything they were changing things, but it was all behind the scenes, right? It was all not visible because it wasn't allowed, right? But if you had to actually test something or take a visible risk, that's like putting it out front. We're doing this in front of everybody, and that wouldn't happen. Now, what was interesting is they had a new CEO. The new CEO came in and said, hey, I'm all about innovation. Let's change the way we're doing things. The staff all says to themselves, that's awesome. We've always wanted to innovate. This is great. But when we got data from them about what their experience is there, they revealed that, in fact, as much as they think it's a good idea to take risks and to test new ideas, the muscle memory says they won't. They have built that into the culture, and that exists and that is valued even when they don't believe it, right? Even when they think something else. So part of what they had to do was create new mechanisms for risk-taking and testing new ideas to make it regular, to make it real, to make it visible inside the culture, to support the shift in that direction because they didn't realize they had built that muscle memory. Another quick example from a different association that we did work with is around transparency. Again, I'm a big fan of transparency, and I remember seeing the data for this particular association, which, as you can see here, there's a lot of traditionalist blocks among the 8 pieces of transparency, and even their information credibility and the trust. I mean, those are getting pretty close down to the line between contemporary and traditional. And I thought, okay, they're not managing conflict is very traditional. Hard truths, meaning the leaders, are they transparent about the choices they have to make? And basic information availability and information quantity, like are we sharing information? Traditional. And in traditional management, you don't share information, or you do on a need-to-know basis, but it's limited, right? You don't want it to get out of control. So I remember going into the meeting with them thinking, all right, folks, it's 2017. You need to wake up. You need to share more information. This is not that hard. But in the conversation, what came out was their experience inside their culture that they're not sharing information came from the fact that when they make decisions, they have too many people involved. Like they had created a culture, kind of accidentally actually, where everyone felt they needed to weigh in on every decision. Not everyone, but more people did than usual. So you've got 5 or 6 people all trying to make a decision on something. And of course, 2 or 3 of them feel like they don't have enough information because it's not their program, but they feel like they should. And so they were also getting feedback from members that they were not being fast enough. And they started to connect the dots. They said, okay, this is not about sharing information. This is about we have too many people involved in the decision. We spend too much time actually trying to share information with everybody, and we don't make decisions fast enough, and we're letting our members down. So from a culture point of view, they had to acknowledge we have created a system where we have too many people involved in decision making. Their action plans are around decision-making streamlining and actually clarifying the roles, who's responsible, who just gets consulted, who just gets informed. That's now being built into their project management. And in fact, they're not trying to share more information despite these, quote, bad traditional scores, right? This is my whole point. There's not good or bad on this one. But they're not trying to move to be more futurist on that because that's not going to move their needle. What will move their needle is really increasing the speed. And that happens through the decision making and really actually limiting the information. But both of these examples, I'm hoping, are reinforcing my point, which is until you know exactly what your culture is, you can't, well, A, it's hard to figure out what direction you need to go in, but even if you figure it out, even if you know you want more innovation, declaring it's not going to work if people can't see the system dynamics that are keeping them from doing that. And so your culture exploration has to get down to that level. I think when you do that, when you get that kind of clarity, the next steps are A, easier to come up with, but B, will encounter less resistance because they will make sense and people will get it. And even though people in this particular culture might still feel a little threatened, like maybe I'm being left out, maybe I should have been involved, but they see, that's what slowed us down, so I have to let go of that. And I have to get clearer on when it's important for me to be the responsible one, and I should advocate to be that in the decision and sort of move forward with that. But that kind of clarity comes from doing this kind of work first. And that's been a big epiphany for me recently. This, by the way, the transparency piece, for that particular organization, when we looked at how the different levels inside the organization experienced their culture, it also reinforced this piece that on transparency, individual contributor, which is basically the bottom of the pyramid, like no, they don't supervise anybody, and senior management actually scored a little bit more futurist than average on transparency. It's the manager level that was struggling. And they realized that, okay, we have this problem of too many people being involved in too many decisions, but where it's the people who are feeling like they're not getting the information is that first line manager. So when they went ahead to figure out, okay, well, how do we implement a new decision-making process, they're zeroing in on that level. I mean, they're addressing it with everybody, the decision-making system, but they're coming up with supports at that level to make sure that they know what information they're supposed to get and what information they're not supposed to get. Again, this goes back to, again, being disciplined about understanding your culture at a really deep level, and when you do that, the action plans tend to make more sense. And so I'll close with just a sort of reinforcing that point about action plans. Because the first complaint I get from people is, oh, culture is too squishy, and so I said, nope, I got that. I gave you the definition. You have that earlier in the slide deck. The second complaint is, well, culture's too hard to change, and I had to defeat that objection. And I said, you know what? All you need is a playbook. I know, okay, we have enough stupid sports metaphors in business, but this one works. You write up a set of plays that say, what am I going to do differently here? What supports am I going to create so that the culture now moves in the direction we need it to? And they fall into certain sections of the playbook, like you're going to have some rituals and artifacts. Yes, you may have a core values poster and put it on the wall. That's fine. That's an artifact of your culture. But maybe we need some stewardship. Maybe people have to have roles or in their job description that they are supporting and growing and nurturing the culture the whole time. Definitely you're going to need some HR plays. Like you're going to have to hire differently. You're going to have to do your performance reviews differently. Certainly process. I mean, I mentioned the decision-making process for the transparency group and really the experimenting process, changing the way they do experiments, the innovation example. You know, there's many processes you're going to change. You're going to figure that out. You might change structure. You might create some new cross-functional teams. I like the technology piece, particularly around transparency. I don't know why we're not leveraging technology more along that. But the point is, you got to figure out the plays. There's no one playbook that works for everybody. But it is not rocket science to design a set of plays. Make sure that some of them do what I call making it real. They're quick wins. They're visible. They show that, hey, we're serious about this cultural direction we're trying to move in. And then some of them are making it permanent. Right? They're infrastructure changes. They take longer, but that means you got to start sooner. So a mix of both. Get clear on that stuff, and then again, if you've done the work to be disciplined about defining your culture at a really detailed level, when you start moving in this direction, when you start running your plays, people are going to get it, and they're going to get behind it. If they don't get behind it, it's going to be obvious, and that's when you have the conversation about maybe this is not the right place for you. And you bring in the people who get it, the people who support the direction you're going in. 'Cause I feel like these days, if we are not changing, we are falling behind. I mean, I'm not the only one to have said that to you guys, I hope. But again, the shadow side of that is, and if you haven't done your culture work, you can say you're changing till you're blue in the face, but it's going to be a challenge. So I think I'm probably out of time. We have a couple minutes maybe for some questions. And again, you can also contact me later if you're an introvert and don't want to ask questions on the webinar. But anybody, Kevin, do we have any questions out there? Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jamie. For those of you who want to submit a question, you can use the little chat window, which is on top of your screen, the second icon in from the left. But as people, digesting this information, think about question, Jamie, not every department is going to, live the culture in exactly the same way. So is that going to be a problem or an issue, and how do you get around that?
Yeah, well, so you sort of don't get around it in the sense, a good question. Subcultures are inevitable. I've seen it even with 14 people. You know what I mean? Like in an organization or 10 people, you can still have subcultures there. And that's, I think, actually a natural part of human systems. It is not natural for us all to behave in exactly the same way. So I think you let that happen. I think that's where the metrics become really important. You need to understand why the different groups are different ways, and you need to tie it back to what drives their success. Every group can behave a little bit differently. They just have to have that answer that says we behave differently this way, but it works for the whole system because of X. That's the piece that I think is missing. People feel like entitled to run it their own way, which is fine because they do need to have variety. But you got to show me how that's not getting in the way of our overall success. You got to show me how that's consistent with the cultural principles that we've established. Like the principles should allow for some flexibility, but there are some limits. And I feel like we don't hold our subgroups accountable to saying, like, let's give them the freedom to be different, but give me that answer. Show me why being different in that way isn't really going to drag us down. And so there's just, I don't know, it's, again, holding people accountable to that conversation.
Okay, great. I think we could all agree that, getting behind a culture change is a good thing, but, there's always going to be pockets of resistance. So any advice for us on, overcoming those pockets of resistance out there?
I think the biggest way to overcome resistance, this is the same question, by the way, if the top is asking me that or if the bottom is asking me that, right? So I get both. I get that leaders are like, oh, my people are going to resist this. How do I deal with it? And then I get the people on the bottom. They're like, oh, the leaders never want to go with the direction we want to go to. Like, how do we get around them? In both cases, it's tie it back to results. People at all levels really do pay attention to the notion of, hey, when we do it this way, it works better. So you got to measure that. You got to show them that. You got to say, we tried it like this, we got these results. Then we did it like this, we got those results. This goes actually back to the experimentation piece from that example in innovation. You got to create containers where you can run experiments and get results. That's the same advice I give to someone down below who's like, my leaders won't support this new culture that I think we need to develop. I'm like, well, they will when you show them the results, And similarly, the people who are like, but the old way I used to do it, I'm comfortable with that, I don't want to change. I'm like, okay, you don't have to change, but notice that when your colleague did it like this, we got much more results. We got better results quicker. Because then you're giving them a choice. If your choice is to get better results or be more comfortable, then you're more obviously making a choice about your future career move. You know what I mean? And so that kind of clarity usually speeds up that conversation.
Sure. So there was a question that was submitted about have you had the experience of aligning governance and staff culture?
Yeah. So yeah, we actually have my experience so far is you start with them separately. And we actually designed this culture assessment with staff in mind, and actually not even just associations in mind, it's broader than that. But we were approached immediately with people who said, can you run this with my volunteers? And so we're doing that now. We have a volunteer version. And it has been very interesting to watch the volunteer conversations about what is it like to volunteer here. And what impact does that have on, what the impact does our volunteer culture have on the way we make decisions, on the way we do our governance? That's been pretty eye-opening. Although I will say my recommendation is you do that work with the volunteer. The staff helps have that conversation. They're involved in the conversation, but it's a volunteer culture conclusion. And then separately you do your staff work. How the two combine, I think, comes out later. But you need to start by doing each one separately, which is not actually what I thought originally, but now that we've done it a few times, that's where I've ended up. Give them time on each side to do their own work before you start to talk about how the two interplay. But I'm a huge fan of going in that direction because, folks, your volunteers are part of your workforce. I know you don't pay them. I know you can't fire them, but they are workforce. Therefore, they are a part of your culture. Therefore, they drive your success. And we should be putting the same kind of attention to that culture as we do the staff side.
Okay. And another question came in is, we're traditionalists but want to be futurists. Are there checkpoints, or what's the roadmap, or do we need to get to somewhere in the middle before getting to being futurists?
I think you need to pick and choose which areas you need to shift. I think you can be strategic in shifting from traditionalist to futurist. I wouldn't do it all at the same time, and I would look for ones that have kind of a leverage factor. I'm finding so far in looking at organizations, for instance, that the agility, the building blocks within agility, can you handle change, how do you distribute power, et cetera, for some reason are linked to the transparency ones around sharing information and trust and conflict and that kind of stuff. I haven't developed a hypothesis as to why those two are linked, but they are. And so that's one where if I know I need to move agility, I might want to see, but I feel like I can get more buy-in for pushing to be more futurist around transparency, or the other way around, then pick one and the other one's probably going to follow. but you're gonna have to sequence it. You're gonna have to pick smaller battles and win them because if you just announce we are making this huge shift from being traditional to futurist, again, I feel like that's going to make less sense to folks, and you'll get more resistance than you would if you do it piece by piece.
Okay. And then I guess maybe there's a follow-up question to that, but it says, how do we know we need to be a futurist versus contemporary or, I guess, traditionalist?
Traditionals. Yeah, no. Well, so this is the missing piece, actually, for me in culture, is the conversation around your success drivers. I know we all do strategic planning. If anyone knows me in the association community, you know I hate strategic planning, but I won't go into that diatribe. Strategy is important, but beyond strategy, there's something deeper around success drivers, and it's more contextual. It's more about what are we facing right now in our environment. I mean, even back to the simple example that I gave from those two organizations, their members were telling them they were too slow. So right now, we need to be fast. Now, so being fast compared to slow, that's going to be moving a little bit more futurist. The future of work is faster than what we had before. So that's how you know you need to be futurist, is because your members are telling you you're too slow. You could have, I don't know, like a certification body or a standard setting group that's like, we do not need to be futurist. We do not need to be messing with our model. Our people's lives are on the line if this standard is violated. It needs to be tested. It needs to be double tested. Right? Like you would have a justification that says, for us to be successful, we need to be here or there. But it requires a little more, I don't know, refinement, I think, of success drivers. You can't just be satisfied with well, our membership went up, or more people came to our meeting, or no. I want you to drill down and say what's going to move the needle for us and what's going to matter. Once you get clear on what matters, then you'll be able to make your call about whether where you are is the right place or not.